back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I am here today to talk to you about the next set of SPFBO books that I picked up. I'm actually really excited because I'm on my final 5 books now that I'm reading, so I'm really close to choosing my finalist, and I'm going to do a video where I not only tell you my finalist, but I also tell you all of the books that I really highly recommend that you check out from all of the ones in my batch. So I'm going to do that after I finish everything, but let's talk about the next set of 5 that I read recently. So as always, I'm going to start from my least favourite up to my favourite in this batch. So the first one I have to talk about is The Private Life of Jane Maxwell, and I picked this one up kind of knowing it might be a little bit of a hit or miss book with me. The cover seemed very cartoon, comic book themed, and I do like graphic novels, I really enjoy them, but I wasn't sure that this kind of story was going to be my thing. This is an urban fantasy. It focuses on a young woman called Jane who is a comic book artist. She actually plans out different storylines involving lots of different characters who she has created based on her friendship group of real life friends. So she has an ongoing plot line that she's been working on for quite a long time. She has characters who she knows incredibly well. She is very familiar with the world, and she just sits and she writes and she draws, and she is just a character who is very creative and someone who really wants to show off what she can do. When we start the book, Jane has unfortunately been fired from her job due to various circumstances, and also she has kind of ended up in a bit of a weird situation where one of her friends comes to her and tells her that he needs her to follow him, so she does. She ends up on a rooftop, and there she realises that not only is her friend kind of acting a bit strange, there's also the rest of her group of friends, and they are all dressed as the superheroes that she modelled them after. So it turns out that superheroes have become a real thing in this world, and actually all the superheroes that she created somehow have come into her world and they need her help with the storyline she has come up with. So that's the general premise, which is quite a fun one. Superheroes, mad chaos, various different characters going on. It seems like it would be a really fun story, but unfortunately for me, it just fell a little bit flat, and that is probably due to the fact that I didn't feel like the character of Jane was someone I really cared for. I didn't feel like she was someone I could connect with or someone that I really related to, and I found her quite difficult to read. Something about how she was written, I can't quite pin it down, but something about how she was written just didn't really gel with me, and I found that for me she was quite a dislikable character. She wasn't someone I wanted to sit down and read about for very much time. She just put me off the book a bit, and although the concept of the superheroes and stuff is something I do enjoy and it's something I think is really fun, I didn't think it was fun enough to kind of keep me reading even though I wasn't liking the character. So I did read this, I did think it was okay, but I wouldn't say it was my favourite read by far, and unfortunately it didn't have enough to kind of keep it interesting to me. It just wasn't for me, I don't think, and unfortunately that's the nature of competitions. I also found in this one that the use of italics was really overdone, and I guess this comes from the fact that it's kind of based around comic books, and comic books love using italics for emphasis. But I just found it so irritating. It was like every other paragraph had emphasis on something, and it kind of lost all meaning because it was so overdone. So that was quite an irritant for me. So I ended up giving it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's light, it's fun, it's easy, but the characters just weren't for me. The next book I want to talk about is called Fire's Song. I picked this one up hoping it would be a pretty fun one because the concept sounded good. It's the story of a princess who is called Key, and she runs away from her family because of a curse that has been put on her. The curse is that whenever her bare skin touches someone else, a fire will come out of her into that person. It will basically flame through that person and kill them from the inside out. So it is very much lethal. It is something she's had since she was born because it's a curse that was placed on her by the deeds of her father, and it's something she cannot escape and she cannot control. The story kind of focuses in on Key, and we follow her and her adventures as she journeys around this world trying to A, stay hidden from her family, and B, uncover the secrets and the way to controlling her curse, because she is so terrified of forming friendships. She's terrified of kind of staying in one place too long. She knows she's going to cause havoc if anyone ever gets too close. And it's a very risky and scary kind of lifestyle that she leads. I actually really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a lot of fun to read, and I do think it's a very light-hearted fantasy that has a lot of good fun things going for it. There's a relationship in this story that I think was handled fairly well on the whole, although personally I find romance in books has to be done really carefully for me to like it, and I don't think all of the areas in this book did it perfectly. I think some of it was a little bit heavy-handed, but in general it worked. The world itself is a fairly standard kind of magical fantasy one. There's nothing too crazy that stands out, except that magic is fairly prevalent, and there are actually different communities and villages around the world which focus on magic specifically. However, many of these communities are hunted down by non-magical people who are quite scared of people who can wield magic. The plot of this book feels quite slow to start, but I think it did gradually increase the pacing as the book went on, and it got more exciting towards the sort of second half. And I do think that one of the things that was kind of a pet peeve for me was that although this is set in a fairly stereotypical medieval-y style world, there's things like vacation, like the term vacation, that just didn't really fit into the world as much. I feel like things like that, sort of modern Americanisms, didn't really fit, and there were quite a few terms like that where I just felt a little bit jarred from the story. So there was that. But I mean, that's minor. On the whole, I liked Key and her story, and I think she's an interesting character. I think the concept is good and the story itself is good. I did notice some grammatical and typo errors, which was a little irritating, but it's not anything too major. So on the whole, I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars, which is 6 out of 10. Definitely enjoyed it. Certainly would recommend it if you're looking for a fun fantasy. The next one I read is Rift in the Deep, and this one is a book that focuses on quite a few different characters. So one of our main characters is called Great. He is a young boy who doesn't understand quite how much power he holds. We also have Malak, who is a boy who has an awful lot to offer, if only he can survive a shore slaughter which is going on. Very, very early in the book, something happens to the people he lives with that is very deadly. We also have Gracia, who is a young woman who has very strange, peculiar, very vivid dreams about a man called Priva Carabel, and these two characters seem inextricably linked at the beginning. We're not exactly sure why. We're not even certain if Priva is a real character or just a dream character at first, but you learn more as the story goes on, and they have a kind of weird connection where she has these dreams. In this world, alongside the 4 sort of main characters, we also have coven witches and witches who can access the rift in the deep. The rift is kind of like this rip in the world where evil is starting to come through, and the deep is kind of this magical well, I suppose, where people can draw on it. The evil of the world is kind of coming back, and it's known by especially magical people that this is happening, but kind of non-magical people don't really know so much about it. So our characters are all fairly new to kind of discovering their powers and understanding the world as a whole, so they kind of have to uncover what's going on around them a little bit too. There is a prophecy in this book that revolves around like the Bender and the Reader and various different unnamed characters who we presumably will find along the way as we read the story, but the question of the book is kind of, can we find the people who are destined to step into these crazy big roles in time for them to save the world? That's the question. I like the story on the whole. I think it did take a little while to get going, and I was a bit confused about who was what and what they could do and all that sort of stuff in the beginning. But I do think as it went on, it definitely got more interesting and sort of faster paced and a bit easier to get into. I do feel like some areas were a little bit over descriptive, and some areas I feel like I wanted more from the characters. And overall, I feel like the book maybe could have been tightened up just a little bit in places to make it a really solid read rather than one that sort of goes in ebbs and flows a little bit. But there are magical creatures, eerie places, and lots of interesting tidbits in the story as well. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars on the whole. Definitely enjoyed it and think it's a fun, easy read again if you can get past the sort of slow beginning. Next up, I read Realm of the Mindweavers. This one is one that I was certainly intrigued about because the concept revolves around a world where loads of people can read minds. It's actually something that's fairly common, and we're following a young girl who is called Zastra, and Zastra is the daughter of a noble. She's someone who's kind of expected to hopefully have some really strong mind reading power, although early on in the book we find out that she actually doesn't have the mind reading power. She instead has an ability to resist mind reading, but her father, who is the noble, is not interested in that at all. He doesn't really care about her very much. As soon as he finds out that she doesn't have mind reading, she's like passed over and moved on to the two siblings she has who are actually twins. He thinks hopefully they will one day rule. However, Zastra as a character is actually a really good one. I liked her a lot as a character. I think although she's a bit feisty and she does make rash decisions, she's a character who I can get behind because she loves fighting, she loves brawling, she loves kind of doing her own thing, being independent, and she's a character I liked, so that was good. I did think that I had a bit of a connection with her throughout, and although she does some things very poorly, like later on in the book she has to go on a journey and she's not really well equipped for this journey, she's just very naive about the wider world. She knows about sort of being in a noble household and what you have to train to do, but she doesn't know anything about the wider world as a whole and kind of how to get on with everyone and do things and blend in. So she has a lot to learn. I like the concept of a world where people are constantly on their guard from mind reading, and it's somewhere that anything can be kind of revealed without you wanting it to. So people at the edge of the cities, for instance, they have a palace guard or a city guard who will be watching out for people, and they'll be listening to the thoughts of people who are going by and searching their minds. And if you have a secret, then you're probably going to get found out, because this world is so open to mind readers, and anyone who can do that is kind of just seen like above everyone else. Is definitely different. I do think that although I like the character and I like the story, some areas were a little bit simplistic for me, and I do think it was kind of talking down a little bit at times. It feels very much like a fantasy young adult book where the author is trying to dumb it down slightly or trying to make it easier as a read and not really addressing the hard topics as much as they could or should be addressed. I know that we're dealing with a younger character, but I still feel like some of the things this character goes through are really tragic and awful, and this character should have the chance to grieve and address that in the right way, and I don't think she really got that. I think it was kind of just glossed over a little bit maybe. On the whole though, I do think this was an easy read, one that a lot of people would probably enjoy, and I would certainly say is a fun one. Especially if you are sort of newer to fantasy or you like YA fantasy, I would definitely recommend this then, because I think that would appeal for people like that. So I gave this again 3 out of 5 stars. And then the final one that I read as part of this batch was called Oathbreaker, and this one is one that has a big old dragon on the front cover. So I was definitely excited because I like dragons, and I was hopeful that I would get some dragon time, or at least a good story, and I did get a good story, definitely. So this is focused on a world where magic has been outlawed. We start by following a young man who's been fighting in the war for the Tsar, and he has basically helped the Tsar kind of overtake and overcome a lot of different places. He's been in this war, he's well regarded, but he's kind of bitter and kind of resentful of everything that happened in the war, and that is Devon. Devon is quite guilty about a lot of the things that happened during the war. He feels kind of bitter to the Tsar, and he feels like there's a lot that should have been handled better, I guess, than it has been. He knows that he's kind of been part of the problem at times. He's reported people or not really done a lot to help people when he could have done. So he's kind of at a bit of a rut in his life. However, he quickly meets 2 other characters who are called Alana and Braden. They are a brother and sister. They are on the run from the Tsar because Braden has suddenly developed powers, and they are not allowed powers. You have to turn yourself over to the Tsar if you have powers, and they don't want to do that. They have good reason not to want to do that. They've heard that people who do turn themselves in either go missing for many years or just never get seen of again. So they're pretty scared of him and they don't want to go there. So they decide they're going to go on the run, and they enlist Devon as a helper for this, kind of against his will. It's quite a funny way that they end up meeting one another and working together, but I really enjoyed it, and I think this is a very light-hearted fantasy. It's one that I found very easy to get into quite quickly, very fun, fast-paced, gripping, lots of good moments that I thought were really well done. It is fairly simplistic in that it's quite predictable, so there's not an awful lot that surprised me about it, but I do think that the characters were done well and the world was developed well and the plot was fun, so all of those things are kind of tick, tick, tick. But for me, it was just the predictable element that wasn't really great. We do have dragon characters and people who have their own sort of magic, which is definitely good. But it also seems like at the start of the story, magic is this really frowned upon thing, and then as you go on, we realise magic is a lot more prevalent and a lot more relevant than many people might think. So that was quite interesting as well. Overall, I found this to be a pretty good romp of the story. It was easy, it was fun, it was fast-paced, and it's everything I kind of like. plus dragons. So I definitely enjoyed it, and I think the cliffhanger at the end was very, very dramatic. So although I kind of saw it coming, I still think it's an interesting enough one that I probably would carry on and read the rest of the books. Whereas maybe not some of the others I've just talked about. I wouldn't be as excited to pick up the second book if there was one. This one I'm definitely like, yeah, I want to know what happens next. So I ended up giving that one a 4 out of 5 stars, which is 8 out of 10 for SPFBO, and I definitely recommend that one the highest out of these 5. So I'd love to hear your comments down below. Which one actually appeals to you the most? It may be one of the ones I didn't like so much actually sounds great to you. Do let me know. Thank you all so much for watching, and look out for my finalists and wrap up of the last 5 coming very soon. So thank you all so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.